Hello, everybody. How are you? My name is Giulia Bonanni. I'm a Gestalt therapist, and I am proud to introduce a new online meeting place for the community, a safe space to just talk. Now, this space is an invitation to learn about and explore the emotions and feelings that you might have been feeling these past few months. It is also a place where we will focus on identifying and acknowledging emotions, how they may manifest, and what might help us navigate the new normal. So today's session is called How Do You Feel? Now, this is not a formula. This question is not, how are you? How are you doing? What are you up to? Okay, those are formulas that we can answer with a single word. We can just say fine, or I'm about to do this, or everything's going well. Okay, now in this case, this goes deeper. How you feel is again an invitation to look inside ourselves and to change the focus from outside to inside. Because these last few months, we have all been so preoccupied with what's been going on around us. We have been focusing on the news. We have been highly connected online, and we have been trying to make sense of what was happening in the whole world at one point. Because yes, something has happened. And the main thing is that there have been enormous, highly significant changes. And our concept of normal has changed in a sudden and intense manner. In fact, it hasn't just changed. The concept of normal has vanished, and so much so that a new term has been coined, the new normal. Now, what does this mean? It means that the world as we knew it is gone. It means that there has been a very big, intense, and sudden change. And something that has been established is that deep, sudden changes have intense psychological effects. Now, I would like to introduce the concept of grief process and its stages. Now, when we think about grief, yes, we think about maybe losing somebody, maybe somebody passing away, or maybe the breakup of a relationship. And we associate it often with having a particular person not be a part of our lives anymore. Now, of course, that might be a lot of people's case right now, because you might have lost somebody. There have been many sudden passings in these past few months, and things have happened that have triggered the grief process that we are all going through. Now, not exactly related to the passing of somebody precise or in particular, but related to the fact that we have lost something. So we have lost normalcy. The world as we knew it is no longer there. And so we could conclude that we have all been experiencing a grief process that has been triggered by this event. So not by a particular singular passing, but by this event that affects all of us. So we could say that we have undergone and are still in the process of undergoing the stages of grief. Now, how could we best describe grief? We could describe it as a mourning, a bereavement, and other words that really come down to a deep sorrow, an ache, a distress. So grieving was first presented by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the process of grief. She was a very famous German psychiatrist who coined the term, the grief process, and described its 5 stages. Now, for the purpose of this talk, this informational talk, I would like to add one more, the initial one, because it is related to the events that have affected us. Now I'm going to go ahead and describe these stages. And what I would like you to do is think and feel whether any of these feelings associated to the stages resound in you, and whether you can remember having felt, or maybe even be feeling right now, some of these emotions. Now, the first stage, which is particular to this event and that is not included in the original stages, would be shock. Now, I have considered fit to add this particular stage because what we experienced at the beginning of the year, or in mid-March in most cases, would be called a shock. Okay, it might have made you feel paralyzed. It might have made you feel blocked, numb, emotionally confused. We in Spain, we were informed in early March that we would have to stay at home. Now, this might have happened at a different time where you are from or where you were living at the moment. Now, when this happened, I was in Spain. And in Spain, it was in early March where they told us that schools would shut down and that all businesses would shut down except for supermarkets and pharmacies. And now we were told back then that this would take a period of 2 weeks and that we were to stay at home for those 2 weeks, not leave the house for anything that was not considered essential, and wait for more instructions, okay? Now, the idea was that this was going to be for 2 weeks, but nonetheless, it was an initial shock. Not before had we been restricted in our movements and had we been tracked the way that we were at that moment. And at the same time, well, at least our president and other world leaders, they started using war vocabulary to talk about the events that were happening, to describe the pandemic. So we were hearing, this is a war, we are at war, this is a battle that we will win, and there was an enemy. So if you went outside your house, you risked running into that enemy, which on top of that was invisible. You couldn't really see the enemy, but the enemy could infect you and it could kill you and those around you. So this was enough to create a state of shock. And in fact, if you think about those early stages, can you remember how this shock might have manifested? Can you remember feeling blocked, maybe feeling confused, even numb? Now, at this point, when the shock might have worn off, and at least here again in Spain, this extended itself in time. So for the first 2 weeks, we were waiting for the moment that we would go outside and that everything would have passed. But this actually didn't happen. What happened was that we were told to stay at home longer. And so this became something that might have given way to another stage. Now, the second stage, which would be the first of the grief process, if we look at the original presentation, would be denial. Now, denial might have felt like a resistance. There might have been feelings of fear, possibly feelings of guilt, and we might have thought to ourselves, this cannot be happening. This cannot possibly be happening. This is not right. This is a big mistake. This is not as bad as it seems. Something is off, okay? So in other words, we were trying at this stage, we were trying, if we were at this stage at all, to avoid or deny the inevitable. Now, it's really not unusual to respond to these intense and sudden feelings by pretending that it isn't happening. We must take into account that denying it gives us more time to gradually absorb the news and begin to process it. Basically, all of these stages serve a purpose. They help us and they walk us through the healing process after a big loss. In the case of denial, we are buying time. We are saying, okay, we cannot process this right now. This is not right. And we are buying time until we can go on to a different stage. Now, do you remember feeling in denial at all? Do you feel those feelings as of today? Do these words ring a bell and have an inner echo inside you? Because the next stage that might have come after denial would be anger. Yes, deep feelings of anger. And these deep feelings of anger might have manifested as frustration, irritation, maybe sometimes feeling anxious and like, something is off and I am very easily irritated. And these feelings might have also brought about some embarrassment or shame, because when anger appears, it can sometimes be overwhelming and it can sometimes lead to outbursts. So if it leads to outbursts, you might get into a fight with maybe your partner, maybe someone in your family, maybe your friends. It might have been a time where feeling this irritation and this anger at this deep sudden change, you might have fought with others. And these feelings might have overcome you. They might have been difficult to keep in check. So anger, again, has its own way of serving a purpose, because anger makes us feel energetic. It gives us the idea that we have strength and we need to feel that strength before the other stages come about. So you feel when you're angry, maybe that you have a way to make things happen. And also it helps you release pent-up emotions. You might have bottled up feelings inside you. And in this stage, they might have exploded. And in a way that could have helped you release. Yes? Now, do you remember outbursts, confrontations, big disagreements, fights that you might have had during this period? They might have been about what was happening or not, but this feeling that there was anger. Now, this might lead to bargaining, which is the next stage in the process. Now, bargaining, what does it mean to bargain? So it means that we seek to find a way out of the situation. So we attempt to postpone sadness, okay? And by that, and we go about that by imagining what if scenarios. So basically, it's our mind's way of pushing off reality. And, it is stubborn and not ready to deal with grief in the sense of what will come next. So it fights off the truth instead. And it goes back in time. Yes, bargaining stays in the past. And it tries to imagine and think, now, what if my government had implemented measures earlier, preventive measures? What if we had suffer restrictions earlier? Could we have gotten out of this mess? Now, what if? So those what if scenarios keep us in the past. We find fault in those around us because we think they could have done something different, and maybe in us as well. And we think what we could have done different. And that might make us feel guilty as well. And by remaining in the past, we are trying to negotiate our way out of the hurt. So what is the purpose of bargaining? Bargaining is a temporary armistice. We come from anger and we were holding our weapons and we were feeling these feelings of anger. And now we lay our weapons down and we go about it in a different way. And bargaining might also lead us to reach out to others. It might also make us feel that we need to talk and that we need to tell our story and find meaning for what has happened, which is ultimately the goal of many processes, to find meaning. Now, after bargaining, we might come to the stage that we refer to as depression. Okay, we refer to as depression, and there might be a sense or a feeling of defeat. So your mood might become serious. You might start to feel the reality of the loss. It might dawn on you that this is something that is causing you sadness. And this is the stage where you are ready to face the feelings of grief and sorrow that come with this big loss that you have experienced and that this stage presents. Keep in mind that to not experience depression after a deep loss would be highly unusual. The realization that you are not getting your life back is understandably saddening and depressing at times. Okay, so if grief is a process of healing, depression is one of the many necessary steps along the way. Now, have you or anyone you know experienced this deep sadness in the past few months? Are you maybe experiencing it now? Depression then sets the stage for the final part of the process. And we could describe this final part of the process with the word acceptance. Now, acceptance is not to be confused with the notion of being all right or okay with what has happened. We must keep in mind that most people don't ever feel okay are all right with a deep, sudden loss. But the purpose of this stage is to have more good days than bad ones, and it is to lead us to accept reality and to face that our lives have changed and that this reality is now our reality. And we might never like it, but we will eventually accept it and learn to live with it. And you might have normalized at this point, maybe not. Maybe yes, you might have normalized different ways of behaving than we did before and than you did before, all of us. Okay, now our lives have been forever changed. And at this stage of acceptance, we are ready to readjust. Again, that may be just having more good days than bad ones. But again, there would be a different stage. That is already a different stage from the ones that we have been experiencing. And we might be ready to explore options. We might be ready to put new plans and go ahead and move forward with our lives. Now, instead of denying our feelings in the acceptance stage, we listen to our needs, we move, we change, we grow, we evolve, and we begin to live again with the loss, but live again and regain a sense of normalcy, even if in this case, it is a new normalcy, right? So it is important to note that it is not possible to do that until we have experienced the stages of grief. So these are the 6 stages of grief that you might have experienced. We had shock, where you might have felt paralyzed or numb or emotionally blocked. We have denial, where you might have refused to believe what was happening and give it the importance that it may have had at that point. You might have had anger, where you might have had outbursts and you might have fought with those around you. You may have bargained, stayed in the past, and created what-if scenarios in your head. You might have felt depressed, deeply sad about the new reality, and you might have accepted it. You might have come to a point in which you understand that this is what there is and that you are ready to make plans, even though this has changed. Now, it is very important to underline that these feelings are completely normal. These stages are normal. And that each of the stages, does not necessarily last weeks or months. In fact, the stages are sometimes responses to feelings that we feel for minutes or hours, and we might go into one and then to another, and then we enter and then we go to a different one, and not necessarily in a linear fashion. So this is not necessarily a chronological order of events or feelings of stages, but stages that sometimes jump from one to the other. And then we might go back to the first one. So the process of grieving doesn't look like a straight line, yes, but it can look like a line that jumps back and forth between the stages. Now, it is very important to accept and legitimize all the feelings associated with the grief process. So you had a right, and you have a right to feel sad, and you might have felt anger, and that's also okay. And you might have bargained, and you might have denied, and you might have been angry, and all of those feelings are okay. And they all serve a purpose toward healing, accepting, and moving forward with our lives. Now, those feelings are here to help us cope with the overwhelming range of emotions that this deep, sudden change has brought in us. That being said, it is important also to note that if you or anyone you know is stuck in any of these stages and they or you are worried about their emotional well-being, I do recommend contacting a therapist for private sessions and for an accompaniment process that can help you soften, alleviate, and make more livable the feelings of loss or confusion that might accompany these times. Now, after this informational session, which I would like to point out is not professional therapeutic session, but only an informational session, I would be glad to open up a space for you to share whether what you have listened to has rung any sort of bell or has echoed inside you, and to see if there is anything that you would like to share with the community. Of course, it's a safe space. Feel free to share, and I give way to comments. And thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the session, and I hope you found it informational. I will see you in 2 weeks. All right, everyone. Have a good night. Bye-bye.